Hey everybody, welcome back to your Dawn of Drones podcast. I'm Dawn Zola, your host and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting. We are in the middle of a month dedicated to this idea of building program success and sponsored by USI. If you've missed that show with USI and Josh Olds, go back and check it out. Check out all of our shows, of course, on AVSI's YouTube channel and on the P3 Dawn of Drones YouTube channel as well. I'm nerding out today, everybody, because this is the very first time we've had attorneys on this show. And when you think about building program success, you may not think, your first thought may not be, maybe I should call a lawyer. But these two professionals who are both partners at the global law firm of Akin, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C., are here to explain why that might be the case and what are some of the major issues facing not only the drone industry, but the advanced air mobility and the advanced mobility industries in general. So we've got Jennifer Richter, who is a partner, as well as Ann Borkovic on the show today. And I'm so excited to have you both.
Thanks for having us, Dawn. We're really looking forward to today's conversation. And I'm really excited to introduce you to Ann, who has been working with me and our autonomous systems clients and is just amazing.
Well, this is great. If you've been around the industry and you're watching this right now, you may know Jennifer. She has, I think, for the last 10, 12 years been really an icon at all the different events, really moving the industry forward up front and behind the scenes, through policy and other things, working with specific clients. But Jennifer, for those that don't know you, can you give them just a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, you bet. And I think 10 to 12 years is right. I guess we have to start counting those years up, right? Yeah, so my background is in telecommunications and technology and representing companies that are building and inventing new kinds of technologies for all different purposes. About a dozen years ago, on a very snowy day here in Washington, D.C., I brought a team of people that I was working with for United Airlines on both aviation and communication systems, transportation issues generally, over to Amazon's DC offices, and we pitched them on doing their drone work and won that work. And that really started everything for my involvement. My particular area, because I'm very focused on communication systems for aircraft, communication systems generally, but in this space for aircraft, I was really talking with them about, we don't have dedicated spectrum solutions for all this new kind of advanced aviation that's going to be happening. I don't know that you can use the aviation protected spectrum and technologies that exist today. How are you going to accomplish this, both on the vehicle and on the ground? And so my focus really has been on communications, navigation, and surveillance, all of the spectrum issues, what bands we can use, what bands we can't use, which is different around the world. And then, what are we using for command and control? What are we using for collision avoidance or DAA? What are we using for remote ID and tracking? What are we going to use for connecting to the UTM system that we hope one day will be operating? So a lot of very complicated issues. And as I said to the industry at the very first UTM conference that NASA held, like, these issues, you're not thinking about these issues. You've got aircraft issues, you've got privacy issues, you've got lots of issues you're working through as an industry, and I get that. But these issues they're another long pole in the tent, and we have to be moving forward on parallel paths, or we're just not going to get there together. I would say over the last couple of years, there's been a lot more focus on these kinds of issues, and we have FCC and FAA really working well together, and DOT as well. So we're starting to see some movement, but there's still just, many, many miles to go.
You're right. I'm going to get to Ann here in a second. So Ann, hold on. But I want to just say one thing. If you all missed the Clubhouse last week with Maggie Schuster interviewing these two professionals, what a great replay. Go back and listen to that. You brought up so many things relating to remote ID and that network solution that never happened, and some of the challenges we're facing now. And one thing you said that really resonated with me, Jennifer, was the fact that it's all about spectrum and nobody understands it. Not even the people that are leading, this effort in aviation. And, so I do want to give a shout out to Jennifer and to Akin. they were silver sponsors of the Law Tech Connect workshop. Jennifer, you did talk about Spectrum at that. I know we're going to talk about it a little bit more here, but looking forward to next year and kind of diving into that a lot more deeply, because with Beyond Visual Line of Sight and Remote ID, of course, I think we're really coming to that inflection point where this needs to be figured out, and there's a rulemaking with FCC right now, et cetera. Now, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but Anne, over to you. Like, so tell us about yourself and the practice that you're involved in at Akin.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. And I always love anything that Jennifer introduces me to. You guys are so inspiring and on top of it. I think that I came to this from a little bit different perspective. My practice focuses on international trade, specifically export controls. So I end up working with a lot of aerospace and defense companies and high-tech companies who are trying to build solutions in this space and help them navigate international procurement, international manufacturing, international hiring, and think about what technology can be shared where, and also some limits on what might seem like a common sense transition from a traditionally military space into this space to deal with collision control, command and control systems, etc. But you start to reach some very difficult policy questions for the US and other governments about what they're comfortable allowing in different spaces and different users.
Yeah, so when you think about especially the UAS and AAM industries, we're talking global, right? And I think we've all met so many companies that are either overseas that want to break into the US market, or conversely, US companies that are eager to work overseas. And then, of course, we've got this conflict going on. That's a polite term, Russia, Ukraine, and so many, I'd say an unprecedented number of commercial companies, sending their drones over there for use in warfare outside of normal channels. It's just really interesting, everything that's happening right now. So I'm sure this is complete job security for you, Anne. Never a dull moment, really, for either one of you. But I want to, before we dive super deeply into some of these topics that you both have expertise in and some lessons learned, and why folks might consider engaging an attorney up front as they're creating their business or looking to get into new markets. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Akin?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off, and Anne can help clean up anything I forget. So Anne's been here a little bit longer than I have. I've been here, I think, 10 years or so. Yeah, so we're a global law firm. We really pride ourselves on being on the cutting edge with, really in every industry that we represent, and advancing our clients' interests in a way that we think is interesting and inventive. But collaboration really is the number one word we use around here. You never have a situation where you pick up your phone and call one of your colleagues in another office in another country and they don't pick up and say, absolutely, let me jump in on that and help you. And everything about Akin supports that. I actually didn't think it was possible in big law to have this kind of collaboration, but it truly is. So we have offices around the world. I think Anne and I probably worked with all of them. So in the US, we had our foundation in Texas 78 years ago. So we've got big offices in Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth, San Antonio. And then on the East Coast, which is really more the locus of where a lot of our managers are today, we're DC, massive in DC. We're number one in public policy and government relations in DC. New York, huge office there. Philadelphia and Boston, that's our newest. And then in California, we have Los Angeles and San Francisco. I was in both of those offices last week. And Irvine, a lot of tech work happening out there, a lot of entertainment industry. Yeah, cool. And then in Asia, Beijing, Hong Kong, Singapore, in Europe, Geneva and London, and then in the Middle East, where we do a ton of work, Abu Dhabi and Dubai, but we actually do a lot of work in Saudi Arabia as well. So really global, and we collaborate with each other across practices and across offices to help our clients. And really that's nowhere more present than in the trade practice. Oh, and just one more thing. We're led by an amazing woman, Kim Cooper-Smith, who really sets the tone for the firm. We are so lucky to have a leader like her, who is strategic and thinking every day about how we can all do our jobs better and work with each other better. And so, it just makes for a really nice place to work.
That's amazing. So your headquarters, though, is in the DC area, and that's where both of you are located normally when you're not traveling?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, got it. So I want to focus on your technology practice, because you kind of alluded to this idea of cross-disciplinary, this collaboration. And I think we have a couple slides to kind of go through this, but there's like maybe three major areas of practice. Here we go. We got regulatory up. Tell us a little about this, because I think most people out there, as they view law firms and what they've maybe seen in a very public way, are some firms getting very are very visible about getting involved in the regulatory side, advocating for certain things for the industry, for their clients. So tell us about what you both do.
So Anne, I'm going to have you launch in on this one. I'm just going to say one quick thing about our regulatory practice, which I think people will find interesting. So Akin Gump has always been known as a lobbying firm. Like, if you need to influence government in Washington, or you need to understand what is happening in Washington, nobody's more tapped in than we are. And the numbers prove that out in the reporting. Our regulatory practice is even bigger than our public law and policy practice. It's massive, and in all of these areas that are listed below. And Anne and I are both sort of on this chart in different boxes, but we're all one big regulatory team. So Anne, over to you. What would you like to say about regulatory?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, before I started working in or for a law firm, I thought mostly about engaging a lawyer for corporate work. We're trying to acquire somebody, we're selling something off, we're investing, for litigation, for defense work. But the regulatory practice that we have is so much more complex and interesting than that. And I think it's why we have so many fantastic clients and opportunities through it, where we basically have tremendous subject matter experts across this whole spread of regulations, former government officials. We have people who go into government, and we do a mix of course, enforcement work. There's somebody has a problem, but we do licensing, we do policy, we do advocacy, and we really help companies with internal compliance planning, thinking about what's coming next. What do you have? You're thinking about product design. Okay, these are where the regulations sit. If you stay within this technical scope, you're fine. You can sell anywhere in the world. If you want to do this, or you're having this challenge, here's what you need to think about. And across all of these areas of services, working together so that it's our pride is that it's easy for you to call and say, I have this issue. You don't need to know about the rules. You can, but you don't need to, and we help you figure it out.
No, that's great. And, compliance is one of those, big issues out there. I mean, Jennifer Akin was a big part of our Energy Drone Robotics Coalition Summit, Law Tech Connect, our first one there. When you think of that sector in particular, but what you're talking about is this international trade practice, and I can't even get my brain around the compliance issues that must be out there, whether you're talking about export control very specifically, or even maybe a cross-disciplinary issue of privacy and complying with the GDPR if you're selling sensors or platforms that are going to be collecting private information on people, or facial recognition technologies. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's really kind of mind-boggling, but we're going to talk more about export controls in a second. I want to jump to the lobbying and public policy aspect of what you all do, because as Jennifer, you mentioned, this is something that I think Akin is very well known for. And tell us a little bit about that, because it's interesting, when you think about a law firm, it's like, law firm and lobbying in the same breath. How is that even possible? Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, definitely. So when you're working in Washington, D.C., when you have a new technology you want to bring to market, a new service you want to bring to market, you not only have to understand what the regulations and laws are that you need to comply with presently, but you might actually have a new kind of technology that hasn't really been considered before by either the regulators or the legislators. And so hiring a firm like Akin to help advance your interests, to talk with legislators about what you're trying to accomplish, to help them to write bills that might require the regulators to make changes in the regulation that really assist with your particular business model is what we do. And of course, keeping clients just apprised of what's happening day to day. But, in the FAA reauthorization that our whole industry has been working on, all year, all summer, that's a perfect example. We have a number of lobbyists and regulatory people that are working on different portions of FAA reauthorization to make sure the language is right and to make sure the dictates to the FAA and the Department of Transportation are right, to make sure that funding for NASA is what it needs to be, and funding for the FAA and DOT too, so that they can accomplish their missions to help all of us. So it's just so important when you have something that's new. If you have something that's old, you may not need to have, regulators and legislators on your side because you've maybe done all that work. But particularly when you're bringing new technologies and new services to market, it's really important to socialize all of that in Washington.
No, that makes an abundant amount of sense. And I know we've got a next slide talking about this international trade practice, Anne, that you are very much involved in. So can you walk us through this a little bit?
Sure. And Akin is unique here. We have the largest international trade practice, and we're about 90 attorneys around the world. And you'll see that we do a mix of all of these different international trade issues. And so I focus on export controls, which is, the U.S., like other countries, has restrictions on what kinds of hardware, software, services, data we can send or exchange with other countries or people from other countries. And then you'll see a mix. Most of these things I'm sure you're very familiar with, but in the most recent times, we spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about the kinds of topics that you're interested in and the interplay with, like you mentioned, Ukraine, but also especially Iran. I think you are all very familiar with some of the challenges and headlines there. And then probably 80% of my day is China. Which parties do we trust in China? How are we getting semiconductors? You mentioned facial recognition and human rights concerns. What does that mean? Who can we do business with? What does that mean for supply chain? How are we navigating this? And so we do that spread.
Yeah, Anne, I'm deviating from the script now, so I'm just going to apologize up front. But you hit on something. There's some big news that just recently came out about China exercising their own export controls vis-a-vis drones, and a lot of the drone pilots out there, big network of folks are very concerned. Like, will they be able to find DJI products, to use? And so, is that something that your firm and that you personally track as well?
Absolutely. So that issue and versions of the concerns about those particular drones have been kicking around for a while, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. So we track that kind of development. We also, from the US and the China side, I think the other pieces that are very challenging right now for a lot of clients are continuing to manage big players like Huawei, thinking about cloud storage, thinking about AI in China. Literally, if we have all of this information we need to manage our flights and programs and our products, where can we store that and be comfortable that we're complying with all of these regulations and keeping our people safe?
Yeah, absolutely. I just saw something the administration put out about, kind of prohibiting investments in certain technologies as well. So,
Yes.
I mean, just so far ranging this international trade, and that's just China we're talking about. We're not even talking about, other locations, right? So probably China could be a full-time job for you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to interject here because maybe just to sort of bring it down to earth for people who are listening. Recently, a DAA company started working with us, and we're working with them through all different things at the FAA, FCC, Department of Transportation, in order to get their technology licensed. But then they were like, ooh, we think we've got some trade issues too that we need to work through because this is a global market, right? And they want to be able to sell their technology globally. So I'm going to turn over to Anne to talk a little bit about very specifically what she's had to and is still shepherding them through. And I want to say, like, there isn't a week that goes by that they don't write and say, oh my God. And Borkovic and Tom McCarthy are amazing, like A+, A+, A+. We're so happy. So anyway, I'm going to turn over to Anne to talk about that work.
Well, Jennifer started all of that in the most successful and collaborative way possible. So all credit to her. But I think this is a company that's making really interesting products. And in the course of working with Jennifer, they identified, hey, we're literally making radars and other things that are interesting and might be controlled, but we want to make sure we're good because we're looking at these international markets and we're thinking about our business strategy 1 to 5 years out. And we want to make sure we can do what we envision. So my colleague Tom and I, we looked at the actual products that the company is making and helped explain export controls and troubleshoot. And we got them to a place where they understood what they have, where they're going in the next couple of months, where they're going in the next year, and what they need to put in place in terms of day-to-day admin, but also long-term planning and agency interaction to be able to sell this internationally.
Yeah, look, at some point, Anne, I think and Jennifer, you and I talked about this, we need to kind of get a show or some kind of a video just about, hey, export controls 101. Same with Spectrum, like people don't understand these issues. They're so critical to doing business in today's global world. But speaking of global world, and you also have a global autonomous systems and advanced mobility practice at Akin. So let's talk about that for a minute, because I know this occupies a lot of your time and is super relevant to the folks out there. By the way, there are folks out there, and we had I think a LinkedIn user from New York. I'm sorry, I can't see who you are just because probably your LinkedIn settings, but thank you for joining in. And Xavier Quintanilla had a question. I don't really know who it was to or what it was about. It was who owns the data?
I think it might have popped up, and Don and team, keep me honest here. I think it might have popped up when I mentioned some of the challenges about storing and managing data in China.
Gotcha.
Because and there's lots of factors that go into who owns the data, including regulatory considerations, where is the data, et cetera, but your contracts and your agreements with your providers and partners. But one thing that I will note for everybody, and I think Don, you alluded to this, is that different countries have different rights to your data. China essentially has very different privacy considerations than we have in the US, let alone Europe. And so your answers here and your considerations are really going to depend on where you're talking about this information.
Yeah, I think, look, Anne, we're not going to be able to get dive too much into this, but I think there were a series of national security laws passed in China that allow them kind of without a warrant, which we're used to in this country and in certain other democratic countries, kind of reach into your business and grab records. And so I know that caused a lot of concern from an international trade perspective. But so, Xavier, the answer is it depends. And there you go. When it's captured, it really depends on your system, where you're storing it, how it's working, where your business is located. So again, very specific questions you have. That's what these ladies are here for, and this law firm. So if you have an international company, you're concerned about your data, I'd encourage you to reach out to Jennifer or Anne in particular on this international piece offline. So I'd highly encourage that. But let's get back to the global autonomous systems and advanced mobility practice. I think we had a slide about that, and kind of walk us through the sectors you support in this area, because it's so wide ranging.
It is, yeah. And just to give another shout out to our leadership at the firm, a couple of years ago, they said, we're doing so much technology work, but we don't know that we necessarily understand all of the work everybody's doing. And so let's really dive deep and understand it and bring people together. And so 3 groups were created: our Global Autonomous Systems and Advanced Mobility Practice, there's a cryptocurrency, and then there's AI and machine learning. So there are 3 sort of cross-disciplinary groups across the firm that are working in these areas. Our global autonomous systems and advanced mobility practice, which we sometimes just call AWESOME, includes professionals from all across the firm. So, it's not only people who really understand FAA and DOT regulations, whether it's autonomous systems on the ground or air, but our cybersecurity and privacy professionals. So to Xavier's question about data, they're on it and understand all that we need to understand about the regulations as they exist today, but that keeps evolving. People in my practice who work on the spectrum solutions and the CNS, people in Anne's practice that work on international trade, our intellectual property group, which is, that's obviously super important. We work on mergers and acquisitions, and investments by private equity and by strategics. So I do a lot of investment in new kinds of advanced aviation aircraft for a company. And then obviously public law and policy and risk assessment and all of that. It's aerospace and defense, as you mentioned earlier, Dawn.
Yep.
It's also all of the companies that are involved in enabling systems. So it's satellite companies and wireless companies. It's municipalities that are thinking about smart cities and how do we enable all of this technology so we can have all these cool things in our communities. It really runs the gamut. And do you have anything else to add about the kind of the sectors of the clients that we serve?
I think that's right. And I think we also work with a lot of actual space craft makers and satellite launchers and those entities that you might be working with to actually facilitate some of the communications.
Oh, Dawn, you're on mute.
Wow. Rookie mistake. I never mute my mic. I was coughing earlier, so I didn't want everybody to hear me coughing. Anyway, you raised this issue about space, Anne, and it's such a great issue because Jennifer and I have talked about this, along with Spectrum, right? These things are emanating from satellites primarily, and space is such a part of this industry, and yet folks don't know much about it. So you go to these conferences, you go to the space symposium, right? And then you go to this drone conference, and then you go to this advanced air mobility conference. It's almost like never shall they meet, but it's like all those folks need to get in one room together at some point, right?
Right. I mean, we have to have, from the ground to the stratosphere, we need to have systems and solutions.
Absolutely.
That help everyone to everybody else is, right? Like that is the work of our future, right? That's really exciting. We're really building our space practice here. Thank you for mentioning that, Anne.
It really is. So obviously the technology always outstrips the regulations. This has been for all time, and we're seeing this happen right now, right before our eyes. And we can yammer about that all day long. We're not going to. We've got like 15 minutes left, and I want to get into some of the things that most folks out there are going to want to know. And I started with this idea of not everybody knows when they need to call a lawyer. And I want to talk about that because I think it's really important. There's different stages of a company. There's different times issues crop up. What's your kind of practical advice for folks as to when they should seriously start engaging an attorney?
If you are inventing a technology, engage an attorney. If you are
because now you're talking intellectual property and protecting your ideas.
Totally. And right. And so, and in my area and Anne's area, what technology are you incorporating in the thing that you are developing? There's obviously the IP issues, but then there's also the regulations, FCC, FAA, DOT, and all of the trade regulations about what you are incorporating. Is it lawful to do that and use it in the manner that you want to in this country or other countries? And those rules are different, right? So so really thinking about it when you're inventing a technology and getting us involved with your engineers so we can really work through it. Testing and deploying a technology, you want to test it. What are the regs related to that? How do you get all the proper authorities that you need in order to be able to do that? It's not a one-stop shop, right? Which is also It's important to have a team like ours that can help you see around all those corners, and I can pass off to Anne, and we could pass off to our environmental group, and we could pass off to our IP lawyers, like without a hitch. You know, clients should not have to hunt for 5 different law firms to do one thing, right? Like, let's just get you business ready. That's how we approach it. And then, of course, if you're going to take your technology and use it globally, you know, you got to have people on, like Anne, on board.
Well, just as Anne, I want to ask you this question very specifically as a practical matter. You know, I'm one of these companies, let's just say hypothetically, and I want to engage with Akin. How do I do that? Do I just go to your website? Do I pick up the phone? Do I send an email? And what exactly does that look like?
Yeah, of course. So you'll email is best. I know that we have some partners who use phones, but honestly,
so old school.
There's tons of information on our website, and if you reach out to any attorney that you know who works at Akin, any one of us will connect you to the right people and start that process. We try to make it very painless for you, but it starts with just understanding what you're looking for. What are you interested in? How can we help you? Are we a good match? And we'll talk about some practicalities and make sure we would be helpful to you. And then there's some administration to bring you on as a client and explain what that looks like in terms of billing, in terms of, you know, just practical aspects of conflicts. What do you need from us so we can be a good service provider to you? But the other thing that I would think about within this is that the relationship with your attorneys can change over time. You might come to us because you're starting out or you're exploring something, and it's a very simple conversation right now, but you start that and we're here if you need us. And then as you progress to different stages of your business, you might call us more frequently or for different issues, etc. So don't think of it, I at least don't think of it as a one time you have to have a massive question or a big issue to deal with kind of thing. It's more like be smart, be thoughtful, build relationships, and make this a true ongoing support for your business.
Yeah, you know, I want to talk about privilege because you mentioned that in Clubhouse, and I think it's a really important point for people that are not familiar with practicing or working with a lawyer. But I do want to say one other thing real quick. I love the word you use, relationship, because being an attorney myself and having practiced in the military and even in private practice, right, for almost 30 years combined, you know, when you get in the trenches with a client, which you do, like a good attorney does, right? Like you just forge this relationship that is really just such a strong bond. You're just in there with them and you really want them to succeed. And I know that's what you ladies do and your team. But let's talk about privilege and how that relationship and those communications within it are protected, why that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you come to us as a client, we have attorney-client privilege, and that really facilitates the ability to have honest dialogue and to be transparent in our dealings so that we can give you the best advice possible. And that's different than a traditional consultant or some other people that you might bring on to help you with aspects of your work. So that's one of the special relationship aspects for working with an attorney. And that privilege continues, and it exists unless you choose to waive it. So it's a privilege to you as the client that you get to maintain this dialogue.
So I knew our time would fly. We have 10 minutes left. So here's what I want to do. Because we have Anne and she's such an expert in export controls and sent me a whole slew of notes on that. What I want to do is take a couple of minutes and for you to provide people the highlights of what you're seeing in the UAS or AAM space that jump out regarding export controls. And then I want to kind of get in what's next for Akin and what's coming up and other things like that. So Anna, over to you for the next couple minutes, just to, you know, to kind of expound on some of the things you're seeing in that particular arena, since it's your area of expertise.
Sure, and thanks so much for the opportunity. I think just to level set, the US and other countries have controls on the flow of hardware, software, technical information, and services across borders or with foreign persons. And the US is part of multilateral treaties. So we're going to have similar controls with our allies like EU, NATO +5, etc. We as the United States have more controls than many of our allies. But one of the things that we do is continue to work with them to try to align and use that to really protect national and global security through our lens. What are we seeing today that might be particularly relevant for you all? Of course, some destinations and users and end uses are so much more sensitive than others. If you are looking at UAVs that can carry heavy payloads over long distances with sophisticated command and control, that's going to be much more regulated and subject to different licensing schemes and restrictions than not. If you're talking about the really sensitive components that go into that, the sensors, the radars, the more sophisticated, the more stringent the controls are going to be. And if you're talking about destinations like Iran, Russia, China, there's going to be a lot of stops along the way. You're not going to be able to get all of that stuff there. And you're not going to want to potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I got to say this, we've seen in the news that they're downing drones that are supposedly US made and finding, or I'm sorry, that they're supposedly like Russian made or Iranian, and finding US components or parts in there. And everybody's like, how is this possible?
No, and so as a real life example, one of the things that we do with a number of clients is help them. If their items have been found in any of those drones, we work with them and multinational groups and US government agencies to help trace the supply chain to figure out how did our items get diverted to those drones and prevent that from happening on a more broad scale. And also looking from a policy perspective, what does Russia need to make those drones? What does Iran need for this? And how can we prevent those countries or those manufacturers from producing that technology at the inception point? So we spend a tremendous amount of time on that, and it really comes down to a couple of things that are very, very special technologies. Night vision, which may not be so relevant to this group because we're trying to make things autonomous and not need pilots, etc. But just to bear in mind, anything night vision, super special, and we're really working very hard to protect that. If we're talking about other kinds of optical sensors, and think about the kinds of focal plane arrays in particular, the actual piece components and the technologies that make the sensors able to operate at great heights with great precision in low visibility, tremendous amount of attention on that. And then I think if we're thinking about radar, and Jennifer, I know command and control and the different communication spectrums are so important. And we talk about the kinds of inventions for different modes of communication. Obviously, we're kind of past the 5G scare at this moment. It is what it is around the world now. And we've lost that battle a little bit. So now where else do we need to protect ourselves, and what can we do now that some of our unfriendly countries, have created 5G networks with allegedly gaps that allow the data being flowed through those networks to go back to our less friendly governments. And so we spend a lot of time talking about technologies and communications systems and channels that have historically been military, but could now be converted and used in another space with more trust.
Wow. I mean, just right there, all those examples you gave, if you're listening out there and any of those are relevant to what you're doing, that's when you pick up the phone and hire an attorney, because that's the kind of stuff that'll get you in big trouble. And, you mentioned, Anne, these parts that are being found. Certainly if you get one of those letters from the government saying, hey, guess what? We found your part. That's definitely the time when you pick up the phone. So that much I know.
Maybe Don will augment that, and Jennifer, I think you'll feel similarly. And Don, anytime you get a formal letter from the government, call an attorney, even if it's a friend of an attorney.
It's so true, so true.
Absolutely. If you leave with nothing else today.
Yeah.
For sure.
And Don, I'm just gonna hop on that real fast, and I know we're just about at the end. If you are importing a drone and you want to use it here, it's very important to look at what communications bands is it operating on, because dimes to donuts, it's going to be operating on a band that was approved in whatever country you got it from, but it's government radar here, or the opposite way around, right?
Wow.
So
who's thinking about these things? You are.
About it, right? And modems. So we had a US company recently come to us and say, oh, we're putting this just regular modem from the ground onto our vehicle to test out some things. Is that okay? I said, well, what bands is it tuning to? They gave me a long list. I sent them back a list that said, half of these you can't use.
Wow.
Don't, right? So like, really, you've got to think about it. Call your lawyers. And the thing is, we've done this stuff so much that we're not going to soak you for a whole bunch of time. Like, we just can help you, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Ann.
Jennifer and I had a recent experience working together where I had a client who was building a communication system for traditional aircraft, and it was going to operate on some spectrums that were historically military in the United States, but not military in other countries. And we were able to work together and get the US to okay it. So the company was able to sell and use this internationally without the US restrictions. So that's a real example of the kind of thing where we can look at the challenge, see it, and work together for positive resolution in a pretty expedient way.
Well, and that's a great success story. But you guys, besides obviously giving individualized advice to specific clients, you're putting out a lot of resources, right? I mean, you have white papers, you have reports. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, you bet. If you go to the Akin website and you look for autonomous systems and advanced mobility, or you look for TMT, you'll find a couple of mid-year reports that we put out on trends that we're watching in either space. And these are long reports that we collaborate on with people from around the practice, different offices, different practice areas. So a lot of really good information in there, and we will keep updating those on a probably semi-annual basis to just keep people informed. Beyond that, and I know we're going to discuss this at the very end, but we do an autonomous Akin newsletter that we send out each month. And so if anybody wants to get on that list, please do. Thank you for sticking that up. You can see Brianna Moore's email there, and you can just email her to get on that list. We try to make it very practical, and it kind of touches on a number of different autonomous systems areas and sort of practical industry developments that you probably should know about. It's a good recap, I think, of what's going on.
Well, that's awesome. And everything is free. All these things that you're talking about, your newsletter, people don't have to buy into it. Same with your white papers, right? So that's amazing and great resources that you're putting out. You're also, as we kind of talked about in the very beginning, Jennifer, you and your teammates, very visible at these conferences. So if someone wanted to meet up with you in person, where are the next kind of couple locations where they might be able to see? I just saw Jennifer, by the way, in Baltimore. I was so excited at the FAA drone symposium and AAM summit. So it's always great to see her in person. But where might others find you next?
Yeah, and we need to find more time to hang out, Dawn.
Yeah, no, we do, for sure. By the way, she did blow me off because there was a long-term client there, and you were going out. So this is like the relationship thing you talked about, right? So it's like, hey, here's the person that I helped do all of these things, and we're gonna go out for dinner tonight. So that was super cool. It was okay, but next time we're getting together. Tell us where you're gonna be.
Definitely. I did show up to the happy hour you're at, but I think I brought up the back. I was like one of the last. Yeah, so actually the next thing that I'll be at, I'm not doing a commercial UAV, but the next thing I'm doing is Women in Drones and the annual award program that'll be here October 25th. And actually during the day on October 25th, I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be at one of the Smithsonian buildings, and I'm just really excited about that. Sharon's doing an amazing job of putting on that program. But we at Akin are going to do, I think, a breakfast meeting on the day of the awards. And I have some really cool speakers, and I'm thinking on sort of big ideas for smart cities and how it relates to our drone industry. And so to help everybody sort of understand the bigger picture of the ecosystem that needs to develop. So anyway, be watching for that. We'll be having some announcements on that soon, but that's October 25th in Washington, D.C.
All right, that's awesome. Well, we are at time, and I like to respect your time and, of course, our viewers, and we appreciate everybody being out there today. Any real super quick, 30 seconds or less closing comments, and you first.
Oh, thanks so much for having us. I mean, this was tremendous, Dawn. Great service, and really appreciate this platform. If anybody has anything that they're interested in, feel free to reach out. I think you'll have our contact information, but otherwise, akingump.com. Just search for our names or anybody that you might know, and we're happy to chat. We're both in DC, and if you're around, just let us know.
Awesome, Jennifer.
Yeah, we really do invest a lot of our own personal time in this industry because we love it and we're fascinated by it. And so what Dawn does here is a great service to the community. The Law Tech Connect is amazing, and you should really be watching for that. And we would love to come and do Trade 101 and Spectrum 101 for you anytime. And that's, we've got stacks of decks on these topics. So anyway, thanks for having us today, Dawn, and Mike too. Mike's in the background. Thanks so much.
He's out there. Yep. He's our Oz behind the curtain. Everybody, thank you so much. Chris Genesis says great information, and thank you. Chris is a super fan. So thank you again, Chris, for joining in. Everybody, we are out here.